You ever stop to think how something born on, like, just a few streets in California can end up echoing in the music we stream? Or even, and this is pretty wild, connect somehow with military history.
It sounds almost like fiction, doesn't it?
Right. But that's exactly the kind of surprising web we're trying to untangle today.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is exactly that interconnectedness. You know, how these local community things, street gangs in this case, and then artistic expression, and even these bigger societal forces, they all get woven together
It's intricate.
deeply.
Hmm.
Really gives you a sense of the layers, you know?
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're going straight into the Piru Gang Alliance and specifically some of its key sets.
Sets, yeah, like subgroups or crews.
Yeah, think of them as individual chapters, often with their own turf, their own identities. We've got a ton of information here.
They
Looking at their beginnings, how they evolved, their rivalries.
And those pop culture links you mentioned. It's all in there.
It is. Our sources, they give a pretty comprehensive look. You get the big picture, the whole Piru framework, but then it really drills down.
Uh-huh. Specific sets like Cedar Block Piru, Treetop Piru, Mob Piru.
Looters Park Piru, Elm Street Piru, all those.
Yeah, and we're seeing everything from like founding dates, locations, to really significant events, crimes, and then how they get referenced out in the world.
And we're not just here to list off facts. The goal is to really get the why and the how.
Pull out the important stuff.
Exactly. Give you a real shortcut to understanding this pretty complex topic without drowning in minor details. Okay, let's unpack this. Back to the very beginning, the genesis of the Pirus.
Right. So the story, it really kicks off back in Compton, California, 1969.
Okay.
A group called the Piru Street Boys,
Hmm.
founded by two guys, Sylvester Scott and Vincent Owens. That was the initial spark.
Okay, but here's where it gets a little fuzzy, right? Their early relationship with the Crips.
Yeah, that's a bit debated in the sources.
Yeah.
Some suggest, maybe an early association, even that they might have used the color blue for a short time.
Hmm.
But then other accounts really push back on that. They say, no, the Piru Street Boys were actually targeted by the Crips pretty early on. Victims, essentially.
So some conflicting info there.
It highlights how maybe those early relationships were fluid, or perhaps just how the stories got told over time changed. But what is clear
Yeah.
is that by the early 1970s, say 71, 72, the Piru Street Boys were definitely in opposition to the Crips, who were getting much bigger and more powerful.
Right. And that opposition, that became the catalyst.
Pretty much. Because they weren't alone in feeling that pressure from the Crips.
Okay.
So they started joining forces with other smaller street gangs who were also kind of getting pushed around or wanted to resist. You had groups like the Brims, the Bishops, the Denver Lanes.
Oh, okay. So this alliance forms.
Exactly, out of the shared opposition primarily to the Crips. And that alliance is what became known as the Bloods.
And the name itself, Bloods.
It came from how members of these allied gangs started referring to each other, calling each other blood.
Like a term of unity.
Yeah, unity, brotherhood, support against a common rival.
Okay, and this is like a super important distinction, isn't it? Because people often use Piru and blood like they're the same thing.
They do, yeah, and it's a common misconception.
Yeah.
But the sources are clear. It's not accurate.
Yeah.
The Pirus are actually a subset within that bigger Bloods alliance.
So Bloods is the umbrella.
Right, and the Pirus are one big, very significant group under that umbrella, but not the only group.
Gotcha. Because other gangs, like the Brims and Bishops you mentioned, they were crucial in forming the Bloods too, but they weren't Pirus.
Precisely. So not every Blood identifies as a Kiru. It's a key piece of the structure.
Okay, that clarifies things. So Piru Street Boys start it, but the Bloods Alliance is the wider reaction. How did the Pirus then, grow from just that one initial group?
Well, over time, more distinct Piru sets started popping up. The sources suggest there are at least 15 known Piru sets just in the greater Los Angeles area alone.
15. Wow.
Yeah, it shows how these things can expand, fracture, develop their own local identities, but still stay under that larger Piru, and by extension, Bloods banner.
And presumably it wasn't always harmonious within the alliance either. Internal conflict.
Oh, definitely not. Even within the Pirus, let alone the broader Bloods alliance, you absolutely have rivalries and disputes.
Like what?
Well, a really significant example we found was a conflict in the late 1990s between Mob Piru and another set called Fruittown Piru.
Okay.
And this wasn't just arguments, it escalated badly, resulted in murders of Mob Piru members, guys who were associated with Death Row Records.
Death Row Records. Okay, that's a name we're definitely coming back to. Big connection there.
Huge.
But just quickly, before we dive into specific sets, identification, how would you, like, spot a Piru set? Is there a visual marker?
Generally, yeah. The most common thing is burgundy or red bandanas. Those colors tie back to the overall Bloods affiliation, obviously.
Makes sense. Red versus the Crip blue.
Exactly. But the sources also mention, sometimes they might use other colors, maybe to try and throw off law enforcement or blend in.
Ah, okay. So red or burgundy is the main signal, but not the only possibility.
Right. It's the strongest indicator.
Got it. Okay, let's get into some of these specific sets then. We've got a few to unpack, each with its own kind of story. Let's start with Cedar Block Piru.
Okay. Cedar Block, they formed around 1980, so a bit later than the original Piru Street Boys, west side of Compton.
And the name, just from the street.
Yeah, pretty literal. Based on Cedar Street, that was their turf.
And this is the set linked to the rapper The Game, right? He talks about them.
That's right. Yeah, the Game has been very open about his affiliation with Cedar Block Piru in his music, interviews. It's definitely given the set some public recognition.
But their history, it includes some really dark, disturbing stuff, too. That 1992 murder, Alan King and his kids.
Yes, that was just horrific, a truly awful incident. Cedar Block Piru members were responsible for stabbing King and his 3 young children.
Why? What was the alleged reason?
The sources suggest King was suspected of reporting a drug house run by the gang.
And wasn't there a military connection there, too? That seems so out of place.
Yeah, that's the really jarring part. They were apparently aided by 2 soldiers from Fort Lewis, Washington.
Soldiers helping commit murder for a street gang.
That's what the sources state. It's a really shocking intersection. Military personnel involved in a local gang crime.
Wow. And with the Game's connection, his family background is also complex regarding gangs, isn't it?
Extremely. Apparently, both his parents had Crip affiliations. Different sets are mentioned: Santana Block, Hoover Street Crips, Nutty Block, Compton Crips.
So his parents are Crips, but he's Piru.
Right. It really shows how deeply embedded these affiliations can be in communities, even within the same family. It's not always straightforward.
And didn't he have siblings with affiliations, too?
Yes. The sources mentioned 2 older half-brothers from Nutty Block Compton Crips were actually murdered. And another older half-brother, known as Big Face 100, was also a member of Cedar Block Piru, like the Game.
Man, that's intense. Loyalties pulling in different directions within one family.
It really underscores the complexity, how deep these ties run, and the potential for tragedy within that environment.
Absolutely. Okay, let's shift to another set. Treetop Piru, sometimes called Bompton Treetop Piru?
Yeah, Treetop. They formed earlier, back in the 1970s, also in West Compton.
And the name Treetop.
Comes from the streets in their territory. A lot of them are named after trees. Acacia Street, poplar, maple, spruce. Cedar and elm are in there, too.
Ah, okay. Makes sense. And these guys, they spread out quite a bit beyond California.
They really have, yeah. While they started in Compton, Treetop Piru's sets, or members, have been documented in places like Tennessee, Texas, Maryland.
So they have reach.
Definitely shows how these gangs can expand, set up shop, far from their origins.
And we have some pretty grim examples of their activities in those other states.
That 2007 case in Baltimore, Michelle Hebron.
Right, that one stands out. Hebron was apparently a high-ranking female member of Treetop Piru there.
High-ranking.
Yeah, and she murdered a man she thought was a rival. But the really chilling detail.
What's that?
She wrote a poem about the killing afterwards, and that poem was actually used as evidence against her.
She wrote a poem about a murder she committed.
Apparently so. Got her a 30-year sentence for murder and racketeering. It's...
Wow. And not an isolated thing outside Cali either. There was Houston, 2017.
Yes, another case. A Treetop Piru member there, Javon Octavio Williams, committed 2 separate murders. He got life.
Okay.
And there's also mention of another member, Donta Knowles, who's a fugitive wanted for sex offenses against a child. So a range of really serious crimes associated with them.
It's pretty sobering, the impact these groups have, far from Compton. But again, there's that cultural side, too. Tree Talk gets mentioned in music.
Yep, they get a shout-out in that 1993 song, Piru Love. We'll talk more about that song later. Seems like it references a few sets.
It does. And also, DJ Quick, the rapper and producer, he was affiliated with Treetop Piru.
Oh, really? DJ Quick?
Yeah. And he referenced them in his track, Dollars Plus Cents, back in '94.
So again, that contrast. Really serious violent crime on one hand.
And a name drop and a famous rap song on the other.
It's strange how that works, isn't it? How these realities kind of bleed into the mainstream.
It really is.
Yeah.
Listeners might hear the name and not grasp the full context, the violence, the history behind it. It just becomes part of the cultural landscape.
Right. Okay, let's switch gears. Mob Piru, also known as East Side Mob Piru, insane mob gang. Mob Piru Bloods. Lot of names.
Yep, Mob Piru. Their territory is East Compton,
And they're known for.
a range of criminal activities. Sources list drug trafficking, robbery, arms trafficking, standard gang stuff, unfortunately. But their biggest claim to fame, or infamy,
Let me guess. Death Row Records.
bingo. Their connection to Death Row Records is huge, particularly through Suge Knight.
Right. Suge Knight. He was Mob Piru affiliated.
Documented affiliate, yes. And the sources allege he actually supplied them with assault rifles,
Supplied them with weapons.
allegedly.
Yeah.
And he famously hired many Mob Piru members to work at the record label. Bodyguards, security, other roles.
So it was a direct pipeline.
A very strong link, yeah. Right at the height of Death Row's power and influence in the music industry.
And this wasn't just background, guys. It extended to the artists, too. Like Tupac.
Absolutely. When Tupac Shakur joined Death Row in 1995, he became affiliated with Mob Piru through that connection.
Man. And there's a list of other Mob Piru guys tied to Death Row. And a lot of them ended up dead, didn't they?
It's a chilling list, yeah. Really highlights the extreme danger and volatility of that whole scene, where the lines between the music biz and serious gang conflict were just completely blurred.
Who's on that list?
Well, there's Wardell Poochie Faust. He was later implicated in the murder of Notorious B.I.G. Poochie himself was killed later on. Big Jake Roby's one of Suge's bodyguards, killed in Atlanta. Trayvon Trelane, he was attacked by Crips just before Tupac got shot in Vegas. Alton Buntry McDonald, very close to Suge, also killed later. Heron Palmer, another bodyguard for Suge, murdered. And Henry Hendog Smith.
Hendog.
Yeah, he actually designed the iconic Death Row Records logo. He was also killed.
That's heavy. A lot of violent deaths connected to that label and that set.
It really paints a picture of just how dangerous that era was.
Definitely. Now, Mob Piru, they also had a relationship with another set we need to talk about, Looters Park Piru. But it wasn't always smooth sailing.
No, it got complicated. Initially, Mob Piru and Looters Park Piru were allies. Both were heavily involved in the death row scene working for Suge.
Okay, allies first.
But that alliance apparently shattered after a member of Looters Park Piru was murdered in 2009.
And that triggered a feud.
A really bitter one, yeah.
Yeah.
Led to numerous shootings back and forth between Mob and Looters Park sets, mainly between 2009 and 2013.
Were there attempts to stop it?
Sources say yes, attempts were made to broker peace, but they didn't work out. The rivalry persisted.
So they went from allies under the death row umbrella to enemies.
Exactly. It shows how quickly these things can shift. Alliances aren't permanent.
And this whole death row Mob Piru story, it's been shown in movies and TV too, right?
Yeah, films like All Eyes on Me, the Tupac biopic, and the TV series Unsolved about the Biggie and Tupac murders, they both depict Mob Piru members and that whole environment.
Further cementing that link in popular culture.
Precisely. Even if dramatized, it's based on those real events and the influence Mob Piru had during that time.
Okay, let's talk about Looters Park Piru then. Also, Looters Park Piru Bloods, east side of Compton as well.
That's right, East Compton. And they have a pretty interesting origin story themselves.
Oh, yeah.
They actually evolved from an older independent street gang called the Looters Park Hustlers.
Hustlers, okay.
And that group, the Hustlers, were apparently one of the key gangs involved in forming the Bloods Alliance way back in 1972.
Wow, so Looters Park has really deep roots in the whole Bloods history.
Very deep roots, yeah. Right back to the beginning.
And the name, Looters Park, just comes from the park.
Exactly. Looters Park in Compton was their main hangout spot. Sources mention that's where they gather, use drugs, play basketball, and plan crimes, like robberies.
Okay. And they had their own beefs, too, even before the Mob Piru rivalry, like with the Kelly Park Crips.
Yes, back in the mid-1980s, there was a significant conflict with Kelly Park Compton Crips.
What started that?
It seems to have been sparked by the murder of a 15-year-old kid named Charles Beeg Stevens, who was killed in Kelly Park territory.
And then retaliation.
Retaliation followed, yeah. The Kelly Park Crips killed a former member of Looters Park Piru named Don Turner. It shows that classic, tragic cycle of violence between rival gangs.
And just like Mob Piru, Looters Park also had the Suge Knight death row connection.
Yep, Suge hired guys from various blood sets, and Looters Park Piru was definitely one of them. Pulled them right into that same orbit.
And during that gang war after Tupac was shot, the one involving Southside Compton Crips, Looters Park actually sided with Mob Piru then.
They did, yeah. Even though there might have been underlying tensions against a common Crip enemy, They allied.
Shows how alliances can be strategic, I guess.
Right. But even within that alliance, it wasn't safe. A Looters Park, Piru member, George Mack, actually got shot and wounded during that conflict.
And there was another really violent incident involving Looters Park, wasn't there, in 2005, against Butler Block Crips.
Yes, that was incredibly violent. A Looters Park member named Christopher Bickrock Holt, along with others, used AK-47s.
AK-47s.
Yes, assault rifles. They opened fire on a house known to be used by the Butler Block Crips.
What happened?
2 people inside were killed. Mario Gordon and Corey Cartwright. Investigators concluded it was a deliberate message, a statement about territory and power.
Just brutal. What happened to Holt?
He got a life sentence for those murders.
And then, after all that, after the death row era faded, that's when the relationship with Mob Piru flipped.
That seems to be the timeline, yeah. From allies to bitter rivals, leading to all those shootings between 2009 and 2013 we mentioned earlier.
It really drives home how fluid and, frankly, how dangerous these gang dynamics are. Alliances shift, betrayals happen.
Absolutely. Often triggered by specific events, power vacuums, personal beefs. It's a volatile mix.
And Looters Park, they also got name-checked in that Pure Love song from '93.
They did. There's a line, "Don't get caught in the jungles or a park called Looters."
Direct reference.
Very direct.
Well.
Again, putting their name out there in the music scene.
Okay, one more specific set to cover from our sources. Elm Street Piru. Also, Elm Street Piru Bloods. They started in Compton, too.
Originated in Compton, yes, but like Treetop, they've spread significantly across the U.S.
Where else?
Sources mention presence in Brooklyn, New York, Atlanta, Virginia, among other places.
And they have some kind of leadership structure mentioned? Generals.
Yeah, interestingly, the sources talk about 2 figures known as generals for Elm Street Piru. Only one is reportedly still alive, but he's said to hold significant influence. Enough power, supposedly, to even strip another blood gang of their alliance status.
Wow, okay. So maybe more centralized than some other sets?
It suggests a level of hierarchy, yeah, and that influence reaching across different states.
And we have examples of their activity outside California, too. Virginia, 2009.
Right. That case involved a 17-year-old female Elm Street Piru member. She was charged with recruiting high school students in Northern Virginia.
Recruiting kids.
Apparently at the instruction of her father, who was the leader of the local Elm Street Piru set there.
Using family ties to expand the gang.
Seems like it. It highlights that recruitment aspect, trying to bring in younger members.
Then there was South Carolina, 2018, Antonio Devin Williamson.
Yeah, Williamson was identified as the leader of Elm Street Piru for the entire state of South Carolina.
State leader, okay.
And he was charged with conspiracy to murder a witness who was set to testify against him in an armed robbery trial.
Trying to silence a witness.
Exactly. Shows the lengths they might go to obstruct justice and protect themselves. Very serious criminal activity.
And then Atlanta, 2020, the shooting of that little girl, Sequoia Turner. Just heartbreaking.
Truly tragic. She was only 8 years old, in a car with her mother during the protests after Rayshard Brooks was killed.
What happened?
Her mother apparently didn't stop at a barricade that had been illegally set up by Elm Street Piru members near the protest site. One of the members opened fire on the car.
Hit Sequoia.
Yes. Killed her. Just an absolutely devastating consequence of gang members inserting themselves into that situation and the indiscriminate violence that resulted. A completely innocent victim.
Horrible. And Elm Street Piru, they also got a mention in Pure Love, playing on the name.
They did. The song uses the obvious connection to A Nightmare on Elm Street. The lyric is something like, "Every town has an Elm Street, but not a Freddy Krueger."
Kind of dark, but memorable.
Yeah, he uses that pop culture hook to make the gang's name stick, but with a definitely sinister edge to it.
So, wrapping up the specific sets, we've seen Piru references popping up quite a bit in popular culture beyond just these individual sets' histories. That Piru love song keeps coming up.
Yeah, from the Bangin' on Wax album by Bloods and Crips, it mentioned Hollywood, Piru, Elm Street, Looters Park. It was a landmark album in a way.
Because it had Bloods and Crips collaborating musically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which was pretty unique at the time, given the intense rivalry. So the Piru sets were naturally represented as part of that blood side of the equation.
And then you have Kendrick Lamar, right?
Yeah.
In M.A.A.D. City.
Yeah, he has that line. Pirus and Crips just bloodied. Or wait, no, it's Pirus and Crips all got along. My mistake.
Right, got along. Which is kind of poignant given the reality.
It really is. It's like this moment of imagining a different reality, a peace that often doesn't exist between those groups. It speaks volumes, that line.
Then there's Lil Wayne. He throws Piru around a bit.
Yeah, in B.O.B.'s song, Strange Clouds, he drops the line, "Piru, gangsters, outlaws. And in his own track, Let the Beat Build, he has that really stark line, feed you to Piru.
Pretty violent imagery there.
Definitely. It reinforces that association of the Piru name with, danger and outlaw status in the public mind through music.
Playboy Cardi, too, more recently.
Yep, in his song Stop Breathing, he says, I'm hanging with the Pirus, hanging with the Fives. Fives being a reference related to blood spirus shows it's still current terminology in hip-hop.
And what about those more controversial recent things, like Chris Brown and Soulja Boy claiming affiliations?
Right. Chris Brown was seen throwing up signs associated with Fruit Town Piru, and Soulja Boy claimed affiliation with Fruit Town Piru, specifically Compton, which is a Blood Peru way of saying Compton.
But that wasn't universally accepted.
No, the rapper YG, who's affiliated with a different blood set, publicly called them out, basically questioning the authenticity of their claims.
So that highlights the complexity, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's real, sometimes it might be for image.
Exactly. And people within the culture might push back if they see it as clout chasing or disrespectful.
Hmm.
It's not always straightforward when celebrities align themselves with gangs.
But wasn't there a rapper actually from Fruittown, Piru in that Bloods and Crips group?
Yes, Bloody Mary. She was part of that Bangin' on Wax project, and it was affiliated with Fruittown Piru, so there's a genuine musical link there, too.
Okay, so bringing this all together then. Man, we've covered a lot. This deep dive, it really shows the Pirus starting as this core group within the Bloods, pushing back against the Crips.
Right, a foundational element.
And then branching out into all these distinct sets, Cedar Block, Treetop, Mob, Looters, Elm Street, each with its own turf, its own history, sometimes alliances, sometimes bitter rivalries.
And those surprising connections to death row records, to specific crimes across the country, even that weird military link.
Yeah, and the constant echo in music, from the 90s right up to today, it really paints a picture of how complex these groups are.
And it's just so crucial to remember that point we made earlier. Piru and blood, while connected, aren't interchangeable.
Right. Pirus are part of the Bloods Alliance, a very significant part, but not the whole story. The structure is more layered than people often realize.
Understanding the nuance is key.
Absolutely. You know, looking at all this, the deep roots in Compton, the spread across the country, the violence, but also the undeniable influence on culture, it makes you think.
How so?
Well, considering how these hyper-local histories and conflicts can have such a wide-reaching impact, even showing up in mainstream music or, bizarrely, military court cases, what does that really tell us?
About the power of these local narratives.
Yeah, maybe. Or how these specific stories, these power dynamics on the streets might actually reflect bigger things happening in society, broader issues, maybe power structures we don't always see. It's definitely something to mull over.
That's a great point. It really does prompt you to think about those intersections. How the local and the global, the underground and the mainstream, they aren't always separate worlds. They influence each other constantly.
Exactly. There's always more beneath the surface.
Always more to explore, for sure. These dynamics are incredibly complex and constantly evolving.
And hey, we definitely encourage everyone listening to do just that. Keep digging, share what you find or think. This deep dive is really just scratching the surface.